Welcome into the Commanders Report. I am your host, Jack Sperry, and today on the show, I've got my 2024 offseason grades for the Washington Commanders. So we're going to go through the entire offseason, from the front office and coaching hires to NFL free agency to the draft. I'm going to be breaking it all down, and then at the end of today's show, I'll give you my official final 2024 offseason grade for your Washington Commanders. Now, before we get into that, make sure you click that thumbs up icon if you've liked what GM Adam Peters has done with this roster here in 2024. If you approve of the offseason that the Commanders have had, go ahead and click that thumbs up icon for me right now. Okay, so first up here, we're going to talk about the GM, because that was the first thing that the Commanders did, was hire a new GM, and that ended up being Adam Peters. And I'm going to give it an A, okay, because in terms of the pedigree, in terms of the resume, it's just you weren't going to find a guy with more credentials than Adam Peters. He comes from the San Francisco 49ers. He learned under John Lynch, who's one of the best GMs in football. I have absolutely no qualms about Adam Peters and that hire and that decision. He also seems like he has a very level-headed personality. You know, he's not going to let his emotions get the best of him. He's certainly somebody that seems like he's the same every day, and he makes solid decisions. So I have no problems with getting Adam Peters. I'll give that one an A. Then we got Dan Quinn, the head coach, and I'm going to give this an A-. The only reason why it's not more than an A- is because he's not an offensive coach, which I really wanted with a new rookie quarterback coming in. You look at the numbers between quarterbacks that play under defensive head coaches versus offensive head coaches. The numbers aren't great. However, when it comes to defensive head coaches, I don't know if they could have done better than Dan Quinn. He's an excellent leader of men. He's one of the most respected men in football, which is why he was able to assemble such an incredible staff. And then also he's a really innovative defensive mind that I think is going to allow this Commanders defensive roster to punch above its weight. And then when eventually they get the kind of roster they want, they're going to be really be able to rock and roll. Then we get to the coordinator hires here. They get Cliff Kingsbury, former Arizona Cardinals head coach and USC quarterbacks coach from last year, get him as the OC. And then Joe Witt Jr. was the secondaries coach there with the Dallas Cowboys, coming over here to Washington with his former boss there in Dan Quinn. He's the new defensive coordinator and play caller, by the way. So let's break down these offensive coordinator hires, starting with Cliff Kingsbury. I'm going to give it a B-. Okay, and the reason why it's a B- is because I'm not the biggest fan of Cliff Kingsbury. I have really just three specific problems with Cliff and his philosophy. The first is that it's extremely stagnant, his offensive philosophy. There's not a lot of motion. There's not a lot of innovative concepts. It's pretty cookie cutter, air raid style of offense, okay? Now, he did do some interesting things, his final year in Arizona, and I'm hoping to see some of the QB run game stuff used with Jayden Daniels, but really stagnant offense, lack of adjustments. You look at his career record in games in the second half of the season versus the first half. It's not good whatsoever. Hopefully, now that he's just an OC and not a head coach, he has more time to make those adjustments, but that's not a strength of his. And then the quarterback development hasn't been a strength of his either. Patrick Mahomes was the most raw quarterback prospect coming into the NFL. People were saying the Chiefs completely destroyed their franchise by trading up to number 10 to get Mahomes because he was that raw after playing 3 years at Texas Tech with Cliff Kingsbury. He had to go to Andy Reid and sit for a year to fix himself, where we found out he was the best quarterback of this generation. So I don't love the quarterback development resume from Cliff Kingsbury. And because of that, they needed to get a quarterback that was pretty well polished already. And to their credit, they did that in Jayden Daniels, in my opinion. I think he's a good fit. I think that what we've seen from Cliff Kingsbury and his offense is that if you have an extremely talented quarterback like a Johnny Manziel at Texas A&M, like Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech, like Kyler Murray with the Arizona Cardinals, those super talented quarterbacks that can make plays out of structure, they can work in this offense. And I think Jayden Daniels is that type of guy. He doesn't need a whole lot of development with footwork or throwing mechanics or mental processing. He's already pretty darn good. Not to say he's a complete product and he won't get better. He will. But I think that this is a really good fit between quarterback and OC. And when it comes to the defensive coordinator, Joe Witt Jr., I'll give it an A. He's one of the most respected defensive minds in football. This is his first chance to be a defensive coordinator. Absolutely well-deserved. And I think he's extremely smart and innovative with the way he thinks, especially about defensive fronts. Now, who's with me now? get down there in the comments section and type me in all caps if you agree with me here and you think that this coaching staff is pretty darn good. If you think and if you believe in this Washington Commanders coaching staff and you think that they can win and they can win relatively quickly with this coaching staff, let me know down there in the comments section by typing me. So the overall front office slash coaching grade for me is an A. I think that you get the right GM in Adam Peters. Hopefully he's the right GM anyway. He had a good resume, and then you get some good coaches, especially Dan Quinn, who I think is a great culture builder. And I think he can do something similar to the Commanders culture that Dan Campbell did with the culture there with the Detroit Lions. All right, now we're on to NFL free agency, where there's pretty much no other team that was more busy than the Washington Commanders. However, despite the quantity of players they brought in, I'm not too sure if they made like the kind of quality signings that were like big time splashes, right? There's some signings that I really liked. I really liked the Frankie Louvu signing. Bobby Wagner as a culture builder and setter is going to be really nice in this defense as well. Jeremy Chin, I think, is a perfect fit for Dan Quinn's bandit role, which is essentially a safety slash hybrid linebacker role. Dorrance Armstrong was a good rotational edge rusher for the Cowboys. Same thing with Dante Fowler. Austin Eckler, somebody that's been very productive in this league. Tyler Biadasz, Nick Allegretti, Marcus Mariota, and Michael Davis are all guys that have starting experience in the league. But, man, I'm just not too sure if you're really looking at any of these signings and saying, wow, this is completely going to move the needle for the Commanders, where now they're going to be like legitimate contenders in the NFC East. You also get a new kicker in Brandon McManus, and then you get some other pieces in here like Farrell and Reeves. That's a really good special teams player. Cornelius Lucas is being brought back. Same thing with Jamison Crowder. Zaccheaus is an interesting slot receiver. Michael Dieter, is good backup depth here at the interior of the offensive line. And then all these guys on screen right now are pretty much going to be depth pieces for the Washington Commanders. So even though there's a lot of players that have been added to this roster via free agency, I'm not too sure there is a whole lot of, big-time splash signings. And that's my biggest gripe with the Washington Commanders here during free agency. A, they didn't have a lot of splash signings, and despite having the most money out of any team in the National Football League. And then number two, they didn't get a top edge rusher. I mean, you had all the money in the world to go out and get Danielle Hunter, and apparently they weren't even looking at him. I mean, what are we doing here, man? And you get Dorrance Armstrong, who was not even a full-time starter with Dallas, and the same thing with Dante Fowler Jr., and those are your two big edge rusher signings? I mean, come on now. I mean, we need to get something a little bit better than that, especially if you're going to be trading away Montez Sweat and Chase Young at the trade deadline last year. And, the lack of big-time moves really does concern me, specifically with this free agency class. At the end of the day, you got to build through the draft, and I think that's what the Commanders are really thinking about here. But the lack of big-time moves when it comes to this free agency class, it definitely is concerning to me at this point in time. And it's definitely going to lower my grade in terms of how I think about this free agency class for the Washington Commanders, because like I said, man, there's just not a whole lot of big needle moving type moves, even though they had the most cap space in the league to go out and make those kinds of moves. So because I think that they left a little bit of meat on the bone when it comes to free agency this year, I'm going to give it a C-, all right? And it's not like it was a terrible free agency period, but I will say I was a little bit disappointed with the way that they didn't address cornerback by getting a big-time cornerback name. They didn't get a top edge rusher, and they really addressed a lot of middling positions like interior of the offensive line. And the guys that they got, Nick Allegretti has never been a full-time starter. He's expected to be the starting left guard for this football team. And, I just think it's a little bit concerning that they didn't go out and get more established names out there on the market. So still to come here on the Commanders Report, the Commanders 2024 NFL draft grades for me here, and then also my overall offseason grade for the Washington Commanders. But before we get into that, let's have a word from our sponsor here at Fanatics. Go to chatsports.com/Daniels to get an officially licensed Jayden Daniels Commanders jersey in your closet today. Fanatics makes really good stuff, man, and it comes at a very reasonable price. And also, if you use our link, chatsports.com/Daniels, I'll put that link in the comments and description. It lets Fanatics know we sent you, and they'll help support the show. So I really do appreciate all of your guys' support. If you want to help out the show today and get a Jayden Daniels jersey in your closet today, you can go to chatsports.com/Daniels. So now let's talk about the NFL draft for the Commanders, because there are some moves that I liked, and then there's other moves that I think, maybe left a little bit to be desired. So we'll start with Jayden Daniels, who I love. Okay, that's an easy A-plus grade for me. He was my number 2 quarterback. He was the guy I would have taken number 2 overall if I had the choice, and I think that was a home run. We don't have to spend too much time on him. Then we get Johnny Newton. Defensive tackle out of Illinois, and this one was kind of confusing to some people because you have Daron Payne and you have Jonathan Allen, but I actually think Dan Quinn sees Johnny Newton as almost like a 5 technique, 3-4 defensive end type, 285 pounds or around that. We'll see where he is after his surgery and when he gets back on the field. But, man, this guy's athletic. He's a really ravenous pass rusher, and then also at that size on the edge as a defensive end, he's going to be really good against the run as well, being able to set those edges. I love this pick from the Washington Commanders. It's an incredible value. I'm going to give it an A. But then pick number 40, you give the pick to the Philadelphia Eagles so that they can take Cooper DeJean. I mean, I hate this move by Adam Peters, man. You don't help out your enemies in this way, especially when they already took Quinion Mitchell in round 1. Cooper DeJean's going to be one of the best nickel corners in the league from the word go, and you're just going to hand them to him? I mean, what are we doing here, man? You look at the trade details. It's not like you got like a king's ransom for this. Yes, you upgraded one of your third-round picks technically into a second-round pick by doing this, but, I'm not a big fan of what the Commanders did with this trade, giving a division rival a very key piece that's going to be a starter for them day one. I mean, if you're going to do this, and I said this at the time, you better get high-value players that are going to be contributors for you right away. And unfortunately, I don't think the Commanders really capitalized on this opportunity the way that I would have liked. So for me personally, guys, this trade grade for me is going to be a C-, man. Some of the players that you ended up getting I like, but, you're giving Cooper DeJean, one of the best corners in this draft class, at a value to a division rival. So for me personally, I don't like that very much. Then we get to the picks that the Commanders got in exchange for trading down. And you get Mike Sainristil, the slot corner out of Michigan. Love his game. It's not a very high-value position, but he's a very good player. And he's going to be really good right out of the box. He'll be a day one starter. You can blitz him off the slot. He's going to be really good in man coverage. No problems taking him there at number 50. Good player. But then you get a tight end that's probably going to be sitting for most of his rookie season here in Ben Sinnott. I mean, I probably would have rather gotten an outside corner or an edge rusher at this point, somebody that had a better chance to really make an impact day one. But at the end of the day, Sinnott, he's got great quickness. He's got very high upside. So at the end of the day, it's not the worst pick in the world. I'll give it a B-. Then Brandon Coleman at number 67, I'll give it a C. I think that his foot speed is unremarkable. I'm not sure if he's ever going to be a true tackle in the league. Plus, he had a very poor 2023 campaign and Senior Bowl performance. I'm not too sure if he'll be able to survive at tackle in the league. Then we got Luke McCaffrey, and I had better grades on guys like Troy Franklin, Taj Washington, Malik Washington at this point. And I had a 6th-round grade on McCaffrey because, in my opinion, he looks slow on tape, man. I know he tested well, but he didn't look great getting out of his breaks. And he just wasn't really getting open even against the kind of competition he was playing at Rice. So that's a D for me. Then we got Jordan McGee in round 5, an A-. Athletic guy, probably going to be sitting year 1, but a potential starter down the line. Then we got Dominique Hampton as a safety, another highly athletic guy, another guy that's going to be sitting a year, definitely developmental type. And then you finish it out with Javonte Jean-Baptiste, the defensive end. For what this is worth, a 7th-round pick, I think this is a pretty good selection. So overall here, I'm going to give the grade for the draft a B. I didn't like the trade down with Philly. I didn't like that you didn't get a number 1 edge rusher. You didn't get a true left tackle that I believe in. But at the end of the day, when you get a guy like Jayden Daniels, who could be a superstar quarterback, that's going to move up the grade quite a bit. And at the end of the day, you are adding valuable pieces to this roster. So my take on the draft here is that obviously when you have this many picks, it's hard to mess them all up, right? You're bringing in some really solid talents into this Commanders locker room. However, I do think you left some meat on the bone. We went into it expecting the Commanders to target left tackle and edge rusher early, and instead, after taking the quarterback, they take a slot corner and a tight end, and then by the time you get to the 3rd round, you're left with the scraps of Brandon Coleman. That's something I didn't like. I wanted to go out and get somebody better. They failed to do that, so that's one of the things I didn't like about this draft. And, that's just my biggest gripe with the whole situation. So now it's my turn here to give my official offseason grade for the Commanders. Now, before I get into it, who's with me here? Let me know down there in the comments section and grade this offseason for the Commanders. What is your overall offseason grade for this team? Give me an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F. Let me know what you guys are feeling down there in the comments section. And for me, my overall offseason grade is a B for this team, okay? I'm not going to sit up here and say it was a perfect offseason, because it wasn't, all right? They had a lot of holes to fill. Obviously, they had the most money in free agency. They had a bunch of early draft picks. They had an opportunity to really turn this around in even 1 year, right? If you would have gotten a number one edge rusher and a number one corner along with what you got in free agency this year, I mean, you'd be set up really nicely. And then if you don't trade down with Cooper DeJean, if you end up drafting a tackle that has a brighter future, in my opinion, than Brandon Coleman, if you make some of these picks and you do some things better, I think this team, instead of being a team that could be good down the road, could be good right now. But at the end of the day, man, what I like is that this team does have a bright future. They have a good head coach in Dan Quinn, who's great in terms of the culture building stuff. You got a quarterback that's extremely talented in Jayden Daniels. I think you have a good coaching staff that fits what they want to do with the guys on the roster right now. And I really like the trajectory that this team is going on. However, what I don't like is that there was some missed opportunities by new GM Adam Peters to make this team better and more competitive immediately in free agency, in my opinion. I mean, they had the most cap space. They pretty much still have the most cap space in the NFL, and they ended up signing a bunch of guys that have been cast-offs, or they're getting older, or all these different things, instead of really splurging on some really top-end players that could have made this team a lot better immediately. And then in the draft, there were some missed opportunities there as well. So for me, guys, there's still some holes left on this Commanders roster heading into the 2024 season. Left tackle is still a major issue, as we have talked about on this show repeatedly. Outside corner, I mean, if Emmanuel Forbes doesn't have a good sophomore season, I think the Commanders are really in trouble when it comes to the outside cornerback position. Also, edge rusher is another position that's kind of, a big question mark. I mean, will Dorrance Armstrong, Cleveland Ferrell, and Dante Fowler Jr. really be able to pick up the slack of Montez Sweat and Chase Young? Then you got left guard, Nick Allegretti. I mean, he's never been a full-time starter. Are we really expecting him to come in and be a really solid piece? I'm not too sure. And then right tackle as well. Andrew Wiley gave up 9 sacks last year. He's still the starting right tackle for this football team. And then tight end, I mean, Zach Ertz is pretty much a carcass at this point in his career. And then you have a rookie in Ben Sinnott. And if you know anything about rookie tight ends, they're usually not super productive. So tight end is still a major hole on this football team as well. So in the end, I'm excited for this team. All right, I know that I've been critical of some things that Adam Peters has done in this video, but at the end of the day, I am excited for this team moving forward, and I cannot wait to see them play in 2024 and see what this team can flourish into under Dan Quinn as their head coach. All right, guys, make sure you click that subscribe button. I appreciate you guys sticking with me here to the very end of today's show. I know it was a little bit of a longer one, so make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already for more in-depth Commanders analysis just like today's video every single day.